Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. My name is Aida and today we are going to look into the file class in Java. We will be going through the exercise that we have in your workbook, which is on page 56. But before that, a little brief introduction on the file class. If you remember, in a program we have variables. Maybe it can be names, can be number, can be an array, it can be in any form of variables. And all the variables will be destroyed or deallocated when the program ends. So when we wish to keep our data, regardless whether you want to keep your input data or maybe you want to save the output of your programs someplace else, you don't want the values to be gone after the program terminates, we can use the file class. Now the file class is used whether in two situations, whether you want to read input from a file and then you do some processing, you give output to the display, which is fine. Or you might have the input already inside, the input will be fed into the system, into the program by the user interactively. You might want to have something like that. And your program will do all the processing, but you wish to keep all the output. And you want to keep the output using the file class, which is also here. Or the other way around is that you are doing a batch processing. For example, you are calculating salary for your company. Maybe 2 employees, 10 employees, 100 employees. So you have in one file the list of all the employee IDs and maybe their pay rate as well as the hours that they work. Then this input goes into your program, which will calculate the amount of salary. The simplest way is that hourly rate times by, the pay rate. So when the program finished calculating all the salary, you wish to keep the salary in another file so that you can print a salary slip. So if that is the case, you need to create two objects using the same class, which is file. One is for input, the other one is for output. Okay? We will do the exercise shortly. Stay tuned. Enjoy. Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. Today we are going to have a look at one program called Exam Report. The file name is examreport.java and the class name is Exam Report. Now the question says, write a program that reads student score from an input file. Basically, we are going to demonstrate on how to read input not from the display console, but rather from a text file that contains the following information: the student metric number, score for the first test, second test, lab assignment, and final exam. We can see this, the sample of the input file. So, as we can see, the first column here is the student metric number, first test, second test, lab assignment, as well as final exam. Now, basically we know the program will read input from a file. Then, the program needs to calculate the total score for each student and assign grade based on the total score. That means given this row, the program has to add all the marks, 20 plus 20 plus 18 plus 36, and then the total mark will be assigned with the grade. If the total mark is between 90 to 100, it will be assigned with grade A. Then, after processing, the output is to be in another text file. So, it says here, write the student's metric number, total score and grade in the output file. This is how your output file should look like. Okay? But that's not it, because the program has or must have an exception to test whether the input file and output file already created or not. If the input file is not found, throw an exception. That means we must have one condition to check whether the input file exists. If it's not, throw exception And we need a catch block to catch the exception by showing the message input file cannot be found and exit the program. And the second condition is that if the output file is already created, throw the exception, show a message output file is already created and exit the program. Okay. Now, I already have the program here. We are going to go through line by line. The most important thing that we must have the input file ready. So in this case, the input file has to be in the same folder with the object file. Okay, in this case, the name of the file is score.txt. So we have one class, the name is exam report, and we have one main method. Within this main method, because we are going to read input from a text file, we need to use what we call the class file from Java. And how do we use a class file? It is the same as we use a scanner, whereby if we want to create an object from a class, we have to name the object. In this case, I use the name file in from the class file, and I'm going to create a new object. I'm going to create the object file in by calling the with argument constructor of the class file. Then I put in the name of the file, the name of the input file that I wish to have. So let's see here. I already have all the information, just like the one stated in the question, and I save as score.txt. It does not has to be the name does not has to be score.txt. It can be in other names as you like. Now, after that, I need a scanner. The reason I need the scanner because I still need to read the input. However, if you remember, if we use a normal scanner, whereby we read input by user from the console, the argument here would be system.in. That indicates the input comes from the console. But in this case, the input, we want the scanner to read input but not from the console, but from a file. However, this object cannot read directly from the text file. It has to read from another object, which is file in. Okay, so basically when we want to read input from a file, we need to have one object for the file and we need another object for the scanner to read the file. Now, the next two lines, line 45 and 46 here is because the question says we must write the output into a file. So we need another object for storing or to save the data as the output file. I will name the object as file out, and it is from the class file, and I create the object file out by calling the with argument constructor from the file class, and I name it as report.txt. However, I don't create report.txt yet. Okay, and because I want to read, the program wants us to write the output into the text file, I need a print writer. I cannot use the normal system.out.println like this one, because system.out.println will print to the console. But now we want to print into a text file. The name is report.txt, but the way print writer works is to deal with the object, which is file out. Okay. Because the question asks us to check whether the file exists, and if it doesn't, we have to throw an exception. Those conditions will be put inside a try block. We have one try block, and we also have a catch block to catch the exception. Now, the line here, it says if not file in exists, which means if file in does not exist. What is the name of file in? Score.txt. If file in does not exist, throw a new file not found exception with this argument. Okay. If it exists, then it's fine. We go to the next line. If file out exists, if file out not exists, we want to throw another exception whereby we will send this message. Output file is already created. This is just to check whether the file exists or not, depending on the question. If the question asks you to throw the exception, then you follow, and this is how we do it. But the main concern on the program is actually to assign the grade to the total marks. It is given in the following code. Now remember, we already have one object that comes from the input text file called store.txt. We also declare another variable called grade from data type character to store the grade that we assign. And this is the main code to read from the text file. We have a loop while input.has next. What is input? Input is the scanner that we use, because the purpose of this line is to use the method has next from the scanner file. Okay, and we cannot use directly has next from scanner. We have to call the method has next and attach to the object that we create from the file scanner. So what input has next, what we will do is that we are going to read and store the variables, the value into the variables. As we will see here, for example, when we read the first line, when the compiler read the first line, it will assign input.next, which is this one. So this will be treated as a string, and this value will be stored inside variable metric. Then it will go to the next one, input.next double. Next double will be this value 20, and it will be assigned, the value 20 will be stored inside variable test1. And the following, the value 20 will be stored in the variable test2, the value 18 will be stored in the variable lab, and finally the value 36 will be stored in the variable exam. Next, after the compiler or the program reads and store all the value in the following variables, we will find the sum or the total marks from the list given for this particular student. Okay, so what we will do is that just to sum test 1 20 plus 20 plus test 2 plus lab 18 plus exam 36, we get the total mark. And the following is very straightforward, because we just want to assign a grade to the we just want to assign grade according to the value of the variable total marks. So basically, if total marks greater than equal to 90, the grade is A. If total marks is 75, for example, the grade is 75, the grade is C. Okay. Now, this is very straightforward. However, as we assign a grade for one student, okay, you see the processing here, this line here from 64 to 68, we are reading the value for the first line and store inside variable, respective variable. Then we find the sum, okay, for test 1, test 2, lab and exam. And then we find a grade for this, between line 72 to 77. And finally, within the loop itself, we are going to print the grade, remember the grade just now, into the text file. So how do we do it? We just call the object output, which comes from the print writer. Let me close this. Output is an object of a print writer, and we want to call the method print line. Okay, the normal or the usual way of outputting or displaying that output to the console, if you remember, is we use system.out.println. But in this case, we don't want to use system.out because system.out will output to the console. But now we want to print, system.out.println and system.out will print the output to the console. But now we want to print the output or the results to a file or to the object called output, which is this one. Okay, so what are we going to print? We are going to print the metric number which has been stored within the sim loop, the total marks which has been calculated within the sim loop, and we want to output the grade as well, which has been assigned in the sim loop. Okay, so as long as there are lines, the loop will keep on continuing, because once we print this, once we run, we will have all the information, metric, total mark and grade in an output file called report.txt, and then it will look, does the input has next line, which is this one, that it will process this line, next it will process the following line. Okay, finally, until this condition is false, whereby there is no next line after the third line in score.txt, this condition will become false and the loop will terminate. Next, finally, we have to close the connection between the input file as well as the output file. Okay, so now let's see when we run. I will first compile. When I run, the console just show me that the process has been completed. But what I'm interested to see is actually we have two files here, report.txt and score.txt. In score.txt, we have the original one. And when we open report.txt, we can see, okay, let me open both. Report.txt. Okay. In report.txt, it will print out the metric. Okay. Just like we assign report.txt, the metric number, the total marks, as well as the grade. Okay. Alright. So, depending on your question, whether the question asks you to have two files, file input and file output, or only one, it depends on the question. Basically, that's it. All the best. Bye.